Hi everyone, you are welcome to today's class. Today we'll be talking about the part 2 of data structure. And in our part 1 we spoke about the first part, which has to do with the array and the object. And today we'll be continuing from where we stop, and today we'll be talking about object and map. So what is object? You know, object and map, they are the type of data that we use in storing data in keys and pairs value, right? So we use object and map to store data in a key value pairs, making them ideal for data structure, right? And the real world scenario on how to use object and map is how we use API, how our JSON response from our API, right? Storing user profile and managing configuration settings, right? So a good example of that, I'll be using objects, right? I'll be using objects. For instance, now we might have a variable like this, a variable user that is equals to, I think we already have a user before. So let me change it to user profile, right? User profile. Let's say my user profile, right? My user profile. So my user profile will be in this sense where I have my ID. So I'll be using array JSON response as a case study, right? We have a name, we have name. Let me say my names, or let's say username, and I'll be putting my name, which is Oluwatobiloba. Oluwatobiloba. Oluwatobiloba, right? So, and I'll also be using the role. And what is my role here? My role is an instructor, right? An instructor. So this is a very good example of the object that I'm talking about. And now we'll be using the map now. We'll be using the map. So now the map. But before we proceed to map, let's have your own profile now. I already have my own user profile. Let's now have your own profile to be your profile, your user profile, right? Your user profile. Sorry, your user profile. And in your user profile, let's have your own data just the same way we have mine. So your ID, right? You have your ID as 2, and your own username, right? So let's have your own username to be, um, I will use wisdom. So I'll use wisdom as an example of your own name, right? Wisdom. Then we have role, the role as a student, right? Your role is a student. Your role is a student, right? So now, you know, these two examples are a very good example of an object. This is an object. This is also an object. So we have two objects now. And now, how to use map to make it relatable, and how map and object works hand in hand together, right? And that is the next step we want to do now. So now let's have a variable. a variable to be users map, right? Users map, and we have the key to that as new map. New map, the function is new map, right? So here's the new map. So now this user map, we store a variable inside it, and the variable is a function called map, right? So now that new this users map now is what we will now play around now. We'll play around this users map, in the sense that we'll say map set, right? Set this user, or which user, and which user are we talking about? We are talking about my user profile and your user profile, right? So let's come here and say my user profile should be .id, right? And this will be for my own user, right? This id will represent my user, which is my user profile. That user id, don't forget, this id is one that we are dealing with now, right? So it will make sense to you. Now just let me proceed. So then, and I have your own, just the same way I have this guy. So I'll just copy this guy, I'll copy it and replace it here. So but for I'll just copy user your own user profile here, just the same way we had that one, and we are good to go. So now what this does is that I now have the key. The key is now the user id, and the value is the what? Is the user object, right? What that means is that the key is the user id. So how I'm gonna get this profile, either my profile or your profile, I'm targeting it with the id, right? I'm targeting it with their id, the id for my own user profile, and the id for your own user profile, right? So that is that about that. So now, by the time we proceed now, you will fully understand. Now let's say I want to access the user instantly, right? Instead of me looping through the array, right? Instead of me looping through the array, because as it is now, let me say that I have another variable called found user, right? Found user to be equals to the user's map, right? The user's map. So, and I want to get the particular user for this particular id, which is 1, right? So any id that has this one, and which id has that one, is mine, that has this one. Do you get that? So anytime I'm targeting this particular found user, is getting this my profile, my user profile for me, because it's the one that has this one, right? But in other case, if assuming that I have I have instead of this one, let's say is a string. Let's assume that it's also a string now. Let's say 1, right? This is a string and not an integer. So instead of me just putting 1 here, so it will now be also an integer. I mean a string. So with that, anything that has that string 1, it will target it for me. That's how it's gonna get that particular user for me, right? So, but let me just go back a bit, just the same way we are, because this was not initially a string, it is an integer, right? So, sorry. Okay, so I think we are good to go. So now I would like you to same thing on how to, let's say I want to console log it now. If I want to console log this guy now, you will see what I'm talking about. But you can go ahead to console log it from your own end and see what you have. So on how to console log it, you just say console log. So we are gonna be viewing it from our own, from our browser. So I would like you to open your browser after you've typed this and check. I will also be showing you what my two have, what I have here too. So I'll say user found user dot name. So I want to console log my own name based on the user ID, which is this one, right? Which is this guy here. So quickly, let's quickly check that together. So you can console log that, and what you have, you should just paste it here. So what I have here, I'll be putting it here. Okay, so what do you have? Right? So this place is username, because one of the key value that you have in your in our my user profile is ID. That's the first one, the username, then the row, right? So that is that about that. Now, assuming that I want to, instead of my username, I want to show my own row. So you just need to just come here and just change this to row, because the row is the key to the value of my own row. And what is my own row? So guess what? It's gonna show this instructor. So by the time I save it now and try to, you know, it will reload. Can you see? We have instructor here. We have the instructor. And how I got here, um, if you remember in our last class, we created an HTML file, and in our HTML file we have we imported our JavaScript file here. So, and that is how, once you've successfully imported it, just right click and right click and open with live server. So, but if you don't have the live server on your VS Code, you can quickly install the extension. So by going to, if you click on this extension icon, and from there you can just search live share. So let me just show you how. So once you click on this extension, so then you search here and ensure that you are connected to the internet. So you just say live, you know, live server. So by the time you click on live server, so it's gonna install, it's gonna install that to you. So let me just proceed from there. So now that you've successfully gotten how to, you've known how to use map now. So but there is another way to actually go about this. But this method that I just show you now, this is called O1 access time. This means that you are accessing the user instantly, right? So that's that about that. So let's proceed. So now let's assume that we want to update our user data both using the map and the property, the object property. Now to do that, let's quickly have a variable, right, called user to what? To update, right? User to update equals to users map. You remember the variable that we declared earlier on, users map, right? To dot get by what? We want to get it by the ID. You know, initially we used my ID. So let's use your own ID now, which is 2, right? Which is 2. And then we now say to update, user to update dot role equals to, now you know initially your own role is a student, right? But we want to change that role now from a student to a learner, right? So now that is exactly what we want to do. Now let's assume that you now just update this guy to learner, right? To learner, and from there, now this guy has updated this particular role, which we target by our map, which is that 2, because your own ID is 2, right? So it automatically get that particular data and update it with learner, which is the role. You know, the role, your initial role is a student, and now he has updated it to what? To a learner. So let's quickly console log this and see the magic that is going on there. So console log, right? Console log, console log users map, right? Users map dot get 2 dot role. So now terminate it, and by the time you save it, so it's gonna, can you see? Can you see that? It has updated it from what? From being a student to a learner. So that is that about that. And we can have, we can store objects, you know, we can have objects to change our objects, the data that we have there. We can use map to update them, we can use map to modify them, and so on and so forth. So now let's go to iteration. Iteration, what I mean by iteration means that you are trying to um loop through an object, right? So you are trying to loop through map of the objects. So I'm just using another English for it, but iteration means that when you are, you know, when you are trying to loop through something. So, and a very good example of that is that it is very, very useful for dashboard, admin panels, and tables, right? When you are when you are repeatedly showing data, right? Instead of just writing the whole code, but you just write it once and it will automatically fetch out some data for you. No, now let's look at a very good example of that while we are treating this this course. Okay, so now let's do something very, very interesting, right? Something very, very interesting. And that thing I want us to do is called iteration, right? It's called iteration. And what does iteration mean? Iteration means that when you are looping something repeatedly, right? It can be on a particular number of time or a infinite number of time. But in this case, we'll be using a specific number of time, and the the specific number of time that we want this to repeat is just 2. Why is it 2? Is because based on the profile that we have, and they are just 2, and we already set it in our map. So now let's go ahead. So now, okay, so now let's have a variable, and that variable is an existing variable, but we'll pass for each inside it. Now let's dive right into it. We have user's map, right? The user's map dot for each, and if you remember, in this for each has to do with loop, right? This is one of the methods that we use for looping, right? In JavaScript, we have loop. And what do we want to do in this loop function, right? What this does is that we want to pass a a an arrow function inside it. And what is arrow function? An arrow function, this is how it looks like, right? An arrow function. So this for each, we want to pass this function inside this particular method, right? So, and to proceed from there, let's pass a parameter. And what is that parameter? Let's say user and the ID. So this is a parameter that we are passing inside this particular function. Now let's do something console log, because that is, we want to console log it so that we'll be able to see our existing profile that we already have, that will save in our map, right? Console log, and then we have concatenation comma. This is a concatenation comma. What this does is that it will ensure that everything that you are putting inside that console log comes out just the way it is. For instance, now if you are passing in function, it will come out just the way it is. If you are passing string, integers, even HTML parameters, right? So it will come out just the same way it looks. So now that is that about that. Now let's quickly pass this particular um value. So let me say ID, right? So, and the ID, after the ID, let me have another value called user dot username. Now where is this username coming from? If you remember, you have your username that we already passed in our variable here, which is our object, this username. And that is where that username is coming from. So we have the username, then also we now have our role. And what is our role? You just say the user dot role. So now let's see what that magic does now. I think we are good to go. We are good to go. Can you see? Can you see that? We have one, which is Oluwatobiloba JP, the instructor, and you as wisdom learner, right? So the reason why it's showing that learner is because we've already updated that particular object. Remember, in this place, your initial role was student, because we've already updated it here now. So you can now have a learner as your what? As your main role. So now let's proceed. Now, why? Let me quickly say this to you so that you'll be able to know how it works on a real life scenario, right? Why this pattern is very powerful? Because number one, object handles structured data in a very clean way, right? Maps handles the indexing, the cache, and the performance, right? And it works perfectly for API data, right? I'm very sure that you must have been hearing about APIs, API. So APIs, the data that is coming from APIs, that is how to handle it very well. And also state management. State management has to do with your frameworks, right? So I will still roll out a course on that, on React and some other libraries that has to do with front end, right? So just stay tuned. And meanwhile, if you have not subscribed to this channel, you can quickly do that now. And so after this class now, so I'll be showing you a real life of how this works in a real project. Number one, we'll be using a simple mini to-do app together, and you'll be able to see how it works on a real life, how the iteration, the data management, the data structures, you know. So thank you. Please subscribe, like, comments. If you have any question, just drop it in the comments and share. Thank you. See you in the next episode.